Hello. It is Thursday, May 14th, 2020. I am in what I believe will be my last few hours of quarantine because of COVID-19. I personally did not contract COVID-19, but a close contact of mine did, which is why I entered quarantine on April 30th. I've had plenty of time to think and watch TV and do Facebook. But anyway, I decided that I should take some of my thoughts from before the COVID-19 measures and lay them out in a video here. As it turns out, I began to write a document on December 29th, 2019, which I now understand to be the day that COVID-19 was first discovered in China, or they had confirmed cases anyway. And I understand that some illnesses or some cases of illness before that date might have also been COVID-19, but they first recognized it on December 29th of 2019. But that same day, I had sat down and begun to write a document that I thought might end up being about 10 pages long. And the thoughts just kept flowing, and I kept writing, and I got up to about 50 pages. And I'm still not done. So that document is entitled Perfect Vision in 2020, Correcting God's People and the Church. And the title says a lot, but in this document, I focus on the four apocalyptic horsemen, and the fourth horseman is his writer's. The writer's name is Death, and in these 50 pages thus far, I make the case for, and the nurse is out my door.
Hello, sir. How you doing?
Good.
Everything is okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Hey, you're going home today, right?
I'm not, I don't know. I'm not in charge of that.
Well, who is in charge?
The doctor and the DHS.
Huh?
The doctor and the DHS.
I mean, so who's going to call me?
The DHS is going to come.
Me, it's going to go. All right. Well, so that was the nurse just asking me if I had any symptoms, if I'm feeling okay. And of course, I haven't had symptoms in the whole 2 weeks that I've been here. But anyway, in this document that I began to write, which is turning into a book, I lay out the case for how I think that this fourth horseman might be at work even now, and I guess the easiest way to convey what I was writing is to actually read some of it. So I'll read what I had written out on that first day, December 29th, 2019, and I won't belabor the issue of just laying out what else I cover later on. So here's how I begin. Perfect Vision in 2020, Correcting God's People and the Church. 2020 will likely be a year of death, spiritual death, Whether or not there will be any cataclysmic events such as the tsunami of December 2004, which killed 240,000 people, a revolution in the United States that kills millions, or a world war which kills tens of millions, remains to be seen. Nevertheless, recent events point toward a year of spiritual death in 2020. What's more is that the ecumenical church is largely responsible for this impending phenomenon. Death is the name of the fourth and final horseman of the apocalypse to go forth from the throne of God, with him being the only rider whose name is mentioned. Revelation tells us that after death begins to ride, Hades follows close behind. Though it's not clear as to whether or not this represents the fifth horseman, what is clear to anyone with a decent level of comprehension is that these horsemen proceed from the throne of God, and that each one represents a certain type of essence, a category of events that each one causes to take place on the earth. Knowing this much should cause any Bible-reading believer in God or Jesus to wonder whether or not any of the calamitous occurrences of their lifetimes are the results of these horsemen having been sent forth. I've wondered about this very thing myself. I've theorized that each horseman might be a living being or might not be a living being, but rather an essence that God breathes out, shapes like Play-Doh, sends forth and causes to pulverize so that it rains down on the world population. I've also theorized that each essence renders millions of manifestations which have varying degrees of intensity. As some of the people who receive it are commoners, while others are high-ranking politicians. The latter often representing spiritual wickedness in high places, i.e. Donald Trump. I should say e.g. Donald Trump because there are plenty more. But it stands to reason that in addition to each essence affecting the thinking of various people, it also affects forces of nature and people's bodies. I've also wondered if each essence has been released multiple times and in varying degrees. Maybe the world has received diluted doses of each essence here to now. And maybe the opening of the first four scrolls represents the release of the undiluted essence with each horseman embodies. Again, the elements of this paragraph are merely my speculations about the four apocalyptic horsemen. Until proven otherwise, I am of the belief that each horseman represents a certain essence, a category of events, and that each one has a corresponding century as well as a corresponding decade within the last 40 years, or I should say 30 years here to now, and the 10 years to come. A corresponding decade and a corresponding year within the last decade, or the coming decade, I should say. I also believe that there is at least one prominent person that corresponds with each horseman. You see. Okay, so in this section, I won't belabor the topic of how I arrived at the following conclusions, as I spell everything out in greater detail in the sections that follow. Right now, I'm focused on supporting the conclusion that 2020 will be a year of spiritual death, which is brought about in large part by the failures of the ecumenical church. So that concludes what I wrote of this document on December 29th of 2019. So you can kind of get a sense of where I go after that. But this morning I wrote some notes down, notes that take into consideration things that have happened since December 29th of 2019. And so I'll begin reading some of them here. So, as I just indicated, I predicted that 2020 would be a year of much death. Of course, I never imagined a pandemic. I imagined a number of other things which I mentioned in the reading of that document, such as tsunamis and other natural disasters, war, or what have you. But the idea of a pandemic actually never crossed my mind on that day. Okay, so as we can see, I was at least right about the idea of there being much death, and I do mean above and beyond what's naturally occurring. But let's not forget that, according to Scripture, it was Adam who brought about death. Let me say a little bit about him. You see, some people tend to forget that there were two significant trees in the Garden of Eden. There was the tree of life, and there was the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. So God tells Adam, don't eat from this tree that's in the center of the garden, in the most prominent spot, and because in that day you'll surely die. Now, the tree of life was off to the side somewhere in a less significant area that he wasn't as likely to pass by, so frequently. But of course, Eve fell for the serpent's temptation, failing to realize that animals don't speak, with the exception of parrots who repeat what you say. And so she gets into a conversation with a serpent, which wasn't exactly the mark of intelligence. But that said, she tempts Adam. Adam eats the fruit, and then God comes and punishes all of serpent kind, womankind, and mankind in that order. But Adam failed to eat from the tree of life. And after he ate from the tree that God told him not to eat from, God put a flaming sword and cherubim around the tree of life so that he would not eat from that tree and live forever. So we don't know what different laws of physics might have existed if he had eaten from the tree of life. Scripture does indicate that he would have lived forever. And of course, Christians believe that after we die, we eventually get re-embodied as eternal beings that do live forever. So there is some continuity there. But in any instance, I believe that after God put that flaming sword and cherubim around the tree of life, that he went back to heaven and sat on his throne and laughed a long, diabolical laugh. Because the man had such an easy test. Just don't eat from this one tree. And of course, he failed that test, and the entire world population is now paying for it. You might say that's unfair, but hey, that's God's idea, that's God's standard, and I'm not one to argue with God. I mean, God is sovereign. Just like the song says, sovereign, sovereign, the Lord our God is sovereign. God can do whatever he wants to do. God can do whatever he wants to do when he wants to. God can do whatever he wants to do when he wants to. How he wants to. Sovereign God is God. But Anyway, in scripture, we also read about the death angel, angel of death, also called the destroyer or the angel of destruction. And the Bible mentions at least 4 instances in which this angel is sent out. In one instance, he kills 185,000 soldiers in the army of Sennacherib. In another instance, the Israelites are told to put lamb's blood on their doorpost, and then their firstborn son would live. Whoever didn't do it, their firstborn son would die. The firstborn sons of the Egyptians died. That was the 10th plague, and that was the one that caused Pharaoh to finally say, okay, all you Israelites, get out of here. Of course, he changed his mind later on and tried to bring them back, and that didn't go well. But the angel of death, oh, now I'm getting a phone call. Hello? Yes. Yeah. Fine. Yeah, they can take the entire time. Okay. The CCMP shelter. Yes. Well, I've got one, but it's kind of old. I could use a new one. Okay. So when it's time to go, I mean, are you going to be the one to call me or who? Okay. Yeah. All right, sure. Well, it seems like I can never shoot a video without interruption. But the good news there is that was the doctor for the quarantine letting me know that I'm now medically cleared and that it will take a few hours to process me out of here, but I will be leaving today. So anyway, getting back to what I was talking about. Okay. So the angel of death sent out on several different occasions. He killed the firstborn of the Egyptians. He killed 185,000 soldiers in Sennacherib's army. And there were a couple other instances where he's mentioned as having been sent out. But anyway, well, like I was actually saying a minute ago, or a few minutes ago, he's also called the destroyer, or the angel of destruction. And I got another phone call. Hello? Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, and I'll be leaving today. I just got a call from the doctor. I'll be leaving today. Yes. All right. So that's the second nurse to contact me this morning. And the doctor's already said I'm leaving, so I want to know why the nurse is asking me about whether or not I have any symptoms. But there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But God knows I don't want to reshoot the whole video. So I mentioned that the angel of death also goes by a couple of other names, such as the destroyer or the angel of destruction. Uh, and that, of course, kind of broadens out what the angel's mandate is. It's not just to take physical life, but to destroy other things as well. So, but that said, to get back to my notes here. So, Trump, which I point out in the document that I read the first part of, Trump may be the president of death, installed by God via the Electoral College. You know, I see God in this. I mean, there's just too much coincidence. A lot of churchgoers like to say there's no such thing as coincidence, because God is in control of everything, and I'm with them on that. I still use the word coincidence. It just works, and so, but there's just way too much coincidence in what's happening around the Trump presidency for me to think that it's all just a matter of chance. I'll get into that a little more later on. But check this out. So he got less votes than Hillary. Even so, he was shooed in by the Electoral College. That kind of shows some of the problems with our electoral system. He survived the Mueller investigation. He survived impeachment. They didn't remove him from office, even though a sensible, well-functioning system definitely would have. And what's more is that he might get reelected, or maybe reselected is a better way of putting it. And I should also point out that in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, after we read about the fourth horseman, it says Hades follows close behind. I referenced that earlier, but let me say here that if Trump gets reelected, that may just be the Hades that follows close behind. Then again, maybe God has a different idea in terms of what Hades entails. But Trump is destroying various norms and the system. That might be a gross understatement, but anybody who's paying attention would understand what I meant by that. But I'll still lay a few things out here. So he wants to destroy various social programs, and when all is said and done, we don't know how much he will have succeeded. He wants to destroy Social Security, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and he's really hunkering down on the Obamacare piece. He hasn't succeeded in all of his efforts, but he surely is trying. He disbanded Obama's pandemic response team, and that brings us back to the word coincidence, because he did that in 2018, and we got this pandemic in the final days of 2019, and it is now 2020, and our death toll from the COVID-19 pandemic is just skyrocketing. So, I mean, it for the most part is 2020 disease, I should say. But in any instance, let me see, what else is he doing to really destroy norms and destroy the system? Of course, he's running against the media, and an interesting point there is he accuses them of misrepresenting him, even when all they've done is quote him. They've played clips of him saying certain things. He's even lied and said that he didn't say things that were recorded. I mean, if you thought that Nixon was bad for stealing tapes or hiding tapes, well, Trump gets taped and then lies and says that he didn't say what he was taped saying. Or these days we don't call it taping, we call it recording because we have different technology, but it's all the same. He's emboldening racists. He's got a bit of a cult following. So it's not just a matter of what he does from an administrative standpoint and how he hands down orders to people that work for him and that he pays, people within the government, but even people who are detached from government are listening to his stochastic demands, and they're carrying them out. Trump has become somewhat of a stochastic terrorist. A mass shooting that took place in El Paso, Texas, was inspired by Trump. The shooter had a goal of killing foreigners whom he had heard Trump speak against. And I've got a call coming in that I'm not going to answer right now. And it's pretty clear that Trump wants to be a dictator. And he was even recorded as saying that when you're president, the authority is absolute. Now, as far as I know, he hasn't actually lied about that and said that he didn't say it. It doesn't mean that he actually hasn't. It doesn't mean that he actually won't. But he's also destroying our international relations. Various countries are pulling away from the U.S. The UK has said that they can no longer depend on the U.S. To assist them, especially in military functions. Let me see. He's weakening the U.S.'s place in the world. So the leaders of various countries, France, Germany, Great Britain, UK, they have actually pulled away from him and decreased the degree to which they work with the U.S. government. And it's because of his crazy ways that I'm not even going to try to fully spell out here in this video. I won't finish the video in time to get out of here. But let me see. He's withholding much needed funding from various international entities, the United Nations, the World Health Organization. Now, this might actually be a positive, but he's actually not smart enough to start a war the way that Bush 43 started the Iraq War. You see, Bush 43 was able to get buy-in from Congress, buy-in from the American public, buy-in from other countries. So he made a case for war that a lot of people bought into, and if you can't get that buy-in, then it's actually hard to begin a war. So you have to be able to connect with people. You have to have some degree of rationale, some degree of conceptual thought, some knowledge of how government works, some knowledge of how the world works, in order to begin a war. So as sad as war is, the ability to begin a war is largely dependent upon the person having some degree of intellect. So Donald Trump, of course, is a dumbass. So if Donald Trump were to begin a war, unfortunately, it would in some ways be the opposite of what Bush 43 did, because most likely it would be whoever is leading the coalition against the U.S. that would be able to get all the buy-in and all the cooperation. It could end up being China. I mean, U.S.-China tensions are growing, and the Chinese president, all other national presidents, are more sensible than Trump. And so the Chinese president could get buy-in from Russia and various other nations, and could really build up a large force that decimates the U.S. military. So it wouldn't be the U.S. leading the largest, most powerful coalition against a nation like Iraq. It would be the Chinese, very likely, leading a large, powerful coalition against the United States. So the U.S. would become the new Iraq in a manner of speaking, and we'd be decimated. So let's just hope that Trump does not get us into war, because we most likely would be on the losing side of that war. And if we give him a second term, who knows? He might actually succeed at beginning a war that leads to the decimation of the U.S. military and possibly even much of the country. So there's that. And of course, my next note, I guess I was a little redundant here. There's his poor handling of the pandemic. So we know that he acted late. We know that he called it a hoax. We know that he has come out against the medical advisors and others who have said that we should not go back to business as normal, business as usual, just yet. He wants to reopen the economy. He's not very receptive to advice from professionals, from experts who say, now is not the time. And he's putting the economy ahead of life. He wants people to go out and make a living, but he seems to be forgetting that you have to live in